Good afternoon, and welcome to the hearing. Today, the Military Personnel Subcommittee will turn its attention to an issue that has not been before this body in 15 years, the issue of gay men and women serving openly in the military. At this time of war for our men and women in uniform, it's been asked why we would hold this hearing. And clearly, this subcommittee has a number of competing issues that need our attention and that have received it. That is why we pushed through needed measures in the House version of the National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2009 and have held hearings on health care for our service members and their families, mental health care for those returning from war, and quality of life issues. This afternoon, we are taking a closer look at yet another important issue impacting the men and women who serve. Since 1993, the Department of Defense has removed approximately 12,600 service members from the military under Section 654, Title 10 U.S. Code, commonly known as the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. With this policy comes a loss of service members with critical skills needed in the field right now, including much-needed language expertise. In my opinion, we must carefully review a policy that rejects otherwise well-suited individuals for military service. This is especially true at a time when the military is trying to reduce the strain on our military by growing the force. Our purpose today is to begin a long overdue review of the various perspectives of this law and policy and to start a conversation about the real-life impact on our service members, their families, and most importantly, on the operational readiness of our military. This hearing is a bit different from the typical hearings conducted by the subcommittee. With two very distinct and strongly held views of the law and policy, the subcommittee has worked very hard to ensure that both sides are afforded identical opportunities to present congressional members with the data and real-life examples to support their perspectives. While the focus of the hearing is to provide a fair and balanced forum for debate, I think it is only fair to share my personal belief that the current policy should be repealed. I came to this position after talking with many service members, active duty, reserve, and retired, and concluded that the open service of gay men and women need not present an operational problem. Many Americans who happen to be gay or lesbian want to answer our nation's call to service, and allowing them to serve in an open and honest manner would uphold the ideals of military service. I would like to enter into the record a statement from the Department of Defense regarding Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The Department will not be testifying today and has been hesitant to address the issue in open session. I regret that the Department will not be here since I believe that there are issues that will likely be raised where their experience could prove to be helpful. However, when pressed to describe how they would respond to a change in the law, senior Department of Defense officials have indicated that they would comply fully with any new legislation, although they do not advocate in favor of changing the policy at this time. Without objection, I ask that the Department of Defense statement be entered into the hearing record. Because equity is the priority characteristic of this hearing, I would remind witnesses that I intend to strictly adhere to the time limits for opening statements. Each side will be given 15 minutes to make their case. Before I turn to Mr. McHugh, I would like to extend my appreciation to those on both sides of this issue who agree to testify. We all know that this is a very difficult issue. It's a very personal issue. It's a very emotional issue. And we expect that everyone here will be treated with the utmost respect during the course of this hearing. Mr. McHugh, I yield to you for your opening statement.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And let me echo your words of both appreciation and encouragement to everyone involved in this hearing today. Certainly we, as a subcommittee on both sides, thank the witnesses for agreeing to be with us, and we expect and look forward to perhaps lively, but nevertheless informative and civil discussion of, as what the chairlady described was a very important issue. And in 1993, when this subcommittee, and I might add I was here, a member of the full committee at that time, and the full committee examined proposals to change the policy regarding military service by gay and lesbian personnel. That process that was undertaken was, I think, fairly described as comprehensive, and it was intense. There were no less than 5 hearings involving 37 witnesses, ranging from the Secretary of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff to current as well as former military sociologists and legal experts who provided a wide range of views and perspectives. And not surprisingly, the issues that were expressed at that time were complex, and again, unsurprisingly, the debate was at times very passionate. Interestingly, the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee at that time supported the change, while the chairman of the Personnel Subcommittee did not, which I think rather illustrates the divisions that this question can give light to. But in the end, the committee and the House and the Senate concluded, and I want to quote, "The presence in the armed forces of persons who demonstrate a propensity or intent to engage in homosexual acts would create an unacceptable risk to the high standards in morale, good order and discipline, and unit cohesion that are the essence of military capability," end quote. That is the issue that should be at question here today. The gentlelady spoke, I think, very accurately to the passions that both sides bring to this question. I think we as a Congress owe it to both sides and to the American people to conduct our inquiries and whatever decision may come out of this process based on that issue defined in the 93 findings of the HASC and the Senate as good order and discipline and unit cohesion. That statement, even today, underpins the current law, and our challenge is to examine and determine whether that conclusion of 1993 remains valid here in 2008. And let me note, I certainly recognize the chairwoman's long-standing desire, as she stated it, to repeal the current law. And I would hope that she would commit to ensuring that no change would take place without a comprehensive and open debate on the full range of issues. I want to state I share the chairlady's disappointment that thus far the services as a whole have not agreed to step forward. I don't see as an individual member how I fully and fairly consider this question, and more importantly, the issue of changing this question, without the input of those in the active military who have the heavy responsibility of commanding our forces at time of war. I would hope and encourage both the Department of Defense and the various services to reconsider the reluctance that they have displayed to this point. While some will argue that much has changed since '93 and the current law is no longer relevant or needed, one thing has not changed in those 15 years. As it was in 1993, the question of whether the law is to be changed should ultimately rest on matters of military readiness, morale, good order, and discipline. So, Madam Chair, I join you, as I said earlier, in welcoming our witnesses today, and I truly look forward to their testimony, and I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McHugh. I ask unanimous consent now that non-subcommittee members be allowed to participate in today's hearing after all subcommittee members have had an opportunity to ask questions. Is there any objection? Without objection, non-subcommittee members will be recognized at the appropriate time for 5 minutes. And now I would like to introduce our panel. We will begin with witnesses representing the coalition seeking repeal of the current law and policy. First will be Major General Vance Coleman, United States Army, retired former artillery officer and division commander. Captain Joan Dara, United States Navy, retired former naval intelligence officer, and Congressman Moran welcomes you to the hearing and thanks you for being here. Staff Sergeant Eric Alva, United States Marine Corps, retired wounded Iraq War veteran. Thank you very much. Those witnesses will be followed by the witnesses representing the coalition that supports the current law, but opposes the don't ask, don't tell policy, which they view as improperly connected to the law. Ms. Elaine Donnelly, President, Center for Military Readiness, welcome, and Sergeant Major Brian Jones, United States Army, retired former Army Special Operations and current business owner and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome to the hearing. And General Coleman, if you'll start, the three speakers will have 5 minutes apiece, and then when we move into Ms. Elaine Donnelly, we'll actually have 10 minutes, and then Sergeant Jones, 5 minutes. We have 15 minutes per panel. Please begin. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Madam Chairman, members of the committee, and my fellow witnesses. During my more than 30 years of service to the United States, I have seen and experienced what happens when second-class citizens, and conversely, when we can achieve, we reverse those views and embrace all of our troops as first-class patriots with an important contribution to make. I enlisted in the Army when I was 17, in the days before we just desegregated our unit fighting forces or our park fountains. I served in segregated units in the United States and in Europe before being selected to attend an integrated leadership academy and then on to Officers Candidate School. After Officers Candidate School, I was assigned to a combat unit. When I reported for duty, however, I was promptly reassigned to an all-black service unit. The message was clear. Didn't matter that I was qualified field artillery officer who was qualified to serve in the combat arms unit. It only mattered that I was black. Madam Chairman, I know what it's like to be thought of as second class, and I know what it's like to have your hard work dismissed because of who you are or what you look like. I also know the difference it made when we placed qualifications of hated discrimination and tore down the walls of racial prejudice in our fighting forces. As an Army commander, I also know how disruptive it would be to remove a trained, skilled service member from a unit. It's bewildering and counterintuitive to me that we maintain a federal law that says no matter how well a person does his or her job, no matter how integral they are to their unit, they must be removed, disrespected, and dismissed because of who they happen to be or who they happen to love. That is why I'm grateful to have the opportunity today to urge Congress to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The military has shown it excels in blending people together from different backgrounds, beliefs, and putting the mission first. I ask Congress to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell and allow the military to benefit from having the best and the brightest to serve regardless of sexual orientation. In Korea, I was assigned to a field artillery unit that was totally integrated. The unit consisted of individuals from all walks of life, black, white, and brown. There was never a problem of unit morale or unit cohesion. The only thing that mattered to the soldiers was that the ability to perform and whether you could be depended upon when the going got tough. One thing that I learned while serving in the Korean conflict, is that a 24-hour combat situation, the troops are not concerned about who you are or what you believe or whether you can, or they only want to know whether or not you can perform. Performance would mean the difference between winning or losing, living or dying. I soon learned from senior NCOs that the key to success was performance. That is true 50 years later, and it will be true 100 years from now. As a battery executive officer in Korea, I supervised a sergeant first class who happened to be gay. He was the communication chief in our unit. He was in charge of the unit's communication, the system setup, the maintenance, and to make sure that all the systems were working. He was to put in plain essential terms a critical part of that unit. Having to remove him from position and from the Army entirely would have harmed our unit's ability to perform its mission. This committee should be concerned first and foremost about the readiness of armed forces and the personnel policies that best serve that readiness. And all of us here today know that. When the federal government gives the order, commanders reiterate it, and the service members salute and implement it. As a combat leader, I learned to constantly train my troops to adapt to changing combat situations, to change in weapon systems, to change in terrain. In the 1980s, I was division commander of the 84th Army Reserve Training Division, testing our mobilization planning by establishing new training models. Military leadership, indeed, is about being able to constantly adapt. That is why we're the best military in the world, and that is why we're better than the outdated arguments that some still use to prop up don't ask, don't tell. Don't ask, don't tell hurts military readiness. It undermines our commitment to being a nation where we are all equal in the eyes of the law. And it ties the hands of commanders who want to welcome and retain America's best and brightest into the military fold. It's time, for the sake of our military, to end this modern-day prejudice and embrace all of our troops as first-class patriots with an important mission to make. I will close by saying to you that unequal treatment to one of us is unequal treatment to us all. Thank you.
Thank you, General Coleman. And if you could all make sure and speak into the mic, that would be very helpful. Thank you. Captain Dara?
Second.
If you could bring it a little closer, that would, yeah.
Good afternoon, Chairwoman Davis and committee members. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify during this important review of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law. My name is Joan Dara. I joined the Navy in 1972 and served for 29 and a half years. I was an intelligence officer and retired in June 2002 at the rank of captain. I was awarded 3 Legions of Merit and 3 Meritorious Service Medals. My final tour of duty was as the officer and enlisted community manager, where I was responsible for all policies that impacted recruiting and retention for the intelligence community. Thus, I fully understand and appreciate the importance of being able to recruit and retain the highest quality people. When I joined the Navy, I didn't know that I was gay. By the time I realized it, I was well into my Navy career, and according to my promotion record and my fitness reports, I was making a significant contribution. It is only now that I've been retired for 6 years that I fully realize how incredibly stressful it was to live under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. For the last many years of my career, whenever the Admiral would call me into his office, I would be 99.9% certain it was to discuss an operational issue. But there was always that fear in the back of my mind that somehow I had been outed and that the Admiral was calling me in to tell me that I was fired. The constant fear of being outed and fired, even though your performance is exceptional, is hard to quantify. Don't Ask, Don't Tell discourages thousands of talented and patriotic citizens from joining the military because, rightly so, they refuse to live a lie. This is a tremendous loss to our military. When a smart, energetic young person who happens to be gay asks me about joining the service, I recommend that they do not join. I love the Navy. It is painful for me to encourage someone who could contribute so much to take their talents elsewhere. When I was assigned as the Deputy Commander and Chief of Staff at the Naval Intelligence Command, I supervised almost 1,500 people and had several openly gay civilians in my command. The morale and productivity of the command was extremely high, and these gay employees were judged, like everyone else, on their demonstrated ability and performance. In September of 2001, the true impact of Don't Ask, Don't Tell on me personally came into sharp focus. On Tuesday, September 11th, I was at the Pentagon attending the weekly intelligence briefing. During the briefing, we watched CNN as the planes hit the Twin Towers. Finally, at 9:30, my meeting was adjourned. When American Flight 77 slammed into the Pentagon, I was at the bus stop. As it turned out, the space I had been in 7 minutes earlier was completely destroyed, and 7 of my coworkers were killed. The reality is that if I had been killed, my partner then of 11 years would have been the last to know, as I had not dared to list her name in any of my paperwork or on any of my emergency contact information. It was the events of September 11th that made me realize that Don't Ask, Don't Tell was taking a much greater toll than I had ever admitted. It caused me to refocus my priorities, and on 1 June 2002, 1 year earlier than I had originally planned, I retired. Since I have retired, I have come out to many people with whom I served, seniors, juniors, and coworkers. Many said that they already knew that I was gay, and without exception, everyone has said that they were pleased that I continued to serve. Military readiness is achieved by attracting and retaining the best and the brightest. Don't ask, don't tell clearly undermines the military readiness of our country. When don't ask, don't tell is repealed and replaced with a policy of non-discrimination, many highly qualified young people who refuse to live a lie will be much more inclined to join the military. Other people, especially younger ones who are likely already out to some of their shipmates, will be more apt to re-enlist. While more senior, older personnel might opt to keep their sexual orientation private, at least they will finally be able to go to work each day without the fear of being fired because someone has discovered they are gay. In summary, I care so much about the Navy, and I want our military to be the very best. But for us to have the most capable and ready military, we must be able to recruit and retain the best and the brightest. Don't ask, don't tell stands in the way of that goal. Thank you.
Thank you. Sergeant Alva? And I appreciate the fact that everybody is really keeping to the time.
Good afternoon, Ms. Chairwoman and members of the subcommittee. My name is Eric Fidelis Alva. I was a staff sergeant in the United States Marine Corps. I am honored to testify today and to share my experiences with the subcommittee. Thank you for holding this hearing. I grew up in a military family in Texas. My father served in Vietnam, my grandfather in World War II. I guess you could say that service was in my blood. I inherited my middle name, Fidelis, from my father and grandfather. As you know, the Marine Credo, Semper Fi, is short for Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Loyalty is literally my middle name. So I guess you could say that serving my country was my calling. I joined the military because I wanted to serve. I joined the Marines because I wanted a challenge. I was 19 years old. I was patriotic, idealistic, and also gay. For 13 years, I served in the Marine Corps. I served in Somalia during Operation Restore Hope. I loved the discipline and the camaraderie. What I hated was concealing part of who I am. My military service came to an end on March 21st, 2003. 3 hours into the invasion of Iraq, we had stopped to wait for orders. I went back to the Humvee to retrieve something. To this day, I can't remember what. And as I crossed that dusty patch of desert for the third time that day, I triggered a landmine. I was thrown through the air, landing 10 or 15 feet away from the vehicle. The pain was unimaginable. My fellow Marines were rushing to my aid, cutting away my uniform to assess the damage and treat my wounds. I remember wondering why they weren't removing my right boot. It wasn't until later that I had realized it was because that leg was already gone. When I regained consciousness in a hospital tent outside Kuwait City, my right leg was gone. My left leg was broken, and my right arm permanently damaged. I also had the dubious honor of being the first American injured in the Iraq War. I received the Purple Heart, along with visits from the President and the First Lady. I was told I was a hero. That landmine may have put an end to my military career that day, but it didn't put an end to my secret. That would come years later, when I realized that I had fought and nearly died to secure the rights for others that I myself was not free to enjoy. I had proudly served a country that was not proud of me. More importantly, my experience disproved all the arguments against open service by gays and lesbians. I knew I had to share my story. Even under the military's don't ask, don't tell law, I was out to a lot of my fellow Marines. The typical reaction from my fellow service members, so what? I was the same person, I did my job well, and that's all they cared about. Today, I am godfather to 3 of those men's children. Normally, I was cautious about whom I divulged my secret to. I felt I had to be. Then one evening, out with some guys from our unit, I let my guard down. One of the guys commented on some women in the bar when my response was less than enthusiastic. He asked me jokingly if I was gay. As a matter of fact, I am, I responded. He swore to keep my secret, but I suppose he thought it was just too good a piece of gossip to pass up. He was wrong. No one he told cared. The response from everyone was the same as it had been from the friends in whom I confided. So what? I was still Eric, still one of them, still a Marine. I was still trusted. That was a very powerful thing for me, that I still had their trust. Because the supporters of Don't Ask, Don't Tell are right about one thing. Unit cohesion is essential. What my experience proves is that they're wrong about how to achieve it. My being gay and even many of my colleagues knowing about it didn't damage unit cohesion. They put their lives in my hands, and when I was injured, they risked their lives to save mine. My experience gives me confidence in our military men and women. I am confident that just as they are capable of immense professionalism and dedication to duty, putting their lives on the line every day, our soldiers are equally capable of putting aside personal bias and standing shoulder to shoulder with gay, lesbian, and bisexual service members. They are there to fulfill a mission, just as my unit and I were. They will do their duty. As a former Marine and patriotic American, I am horrified that Don't Ask, Don't Tell forces trained and ready troops to choose between serving their country and living openly, a choice I myself would have been faced with had a landmine not made it for me. I am appalled that Don't Ask, Don't Tell forces the involuntary separation of thousands of skilled service members during a time of war, threatening our country's military readiness for no good reason. My experiences serving in the military demonstrate that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is an outdated, useless law. Since leaving the military, the opportunities I've had to speak with Americans, both gay and straight, have showed time and again that the American people support open service by gay, lesbian, and bisexual troops. Those who support Don't Ask, Don't Tell claim they do so in the interest of unit cohesion. Well, as a former Marine, I can tell you what it takes to build unit cohesion: trust. And I can also tell you that Don't
Sergeant
Ask,
Alva,
Don't Tell.
I'm sorry, but could you finish your remarks very quickly?
Yes,
Thank you.
ma'am. I can also tell you that Don't Ask, Don't Tell does nothing but undercut the trust, and with it, our nation's security. I urge the members of the subcommittee to rethink this failed law. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Donnelly. You're on. Be sure your microphone's on.
I'm Elaine Donnelly. I founded the Center for Military Readiness in 1993. In that year, Bill Clinton announced his intent to lift the ban on homosexuals in the military. He proposed a concept known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which Congress rejected. In fact, most of the problems we're hearing about today are coming about because the Department of Defense, Bill Clinton, imposed Don't Ask, Don't Tell on the military, even though the law says something different. If the law had been given a name of its own, it would have been called the Military Personnel Eligibility Act of 1993, because you see, it is all about eligibility, but it doesn't have a name of its own other than the technical name, Section 654, Title 10. We support this law. We do not support Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The law was passed with overwhelming bipartisan majorities, and it's been upheld as constitutional several times. The only compromise was the dropping of the question, are you homosexual? Used to be on induction forms. That question can be reinstated at any time, and it should be. Because to say that you can't ask questions about eligibility is like telling a bartender that you cannot serve liquor to people who are underage, but you cannot ask them for ID. It makes no sense. It's not good policy, but the law is good policy. The law is there, and it's designed to promote good order and discipline. I want to talk about the future. I'd like to talk about what would happen if you actually repealed this law. The result would be devastating because the military doesn't do things halfway. And if you say that this is in the tradition, the proud tradition of civil rights, which we have seen in our history in positive ways, if we say that a sexual minority from here on is going to have special rights, that means that anybody who disagrees is contrary to the zero tolerance policy. It means that anybody whose attitudes are different from what is advocated by the ACLU and the left, the San Francisco left, who want to impose their agenda on the military, those people become unacceptable, and they would have to eventually be forced out of the military. You see, when promotions are denied, that means they get the message they cannot stay in the military. We would lose thousands of people if they were told under a zero tolerance policy that you must accept the new paradigm, which is forced cohabitation of men and women with homosexuals in the military. Forced cohabitation in all branches of the service, all communities. I'm talking about the infantry, special operations forces, Navy SEALs, cramped submarines. We are not talking about a Hollywood world here. We're talking about real consequences for real people. If we say that this is going to be the new paradigm, we're going to tolerate absolutely no dissent, that would put a tremendous, perhaps unacceptable burden on people who do have religious convictions, or those who simply believe that the policy, the law as it is now is a good idea, they would become unacceptable to the military and would be driven out. Some people have said, well, that's okay for the sake of diversity. We cannot afford to lose so many people if they disagree with this new policy of forced cohabitation of heterosexuals and homosexuals in the military. How would enforcement work? Well, if a female soldier reports an incident of harassment, she enjoys the presumption of truthfulness. But under the new civil rights standard or zero tolerance standard, if a male soldier reports or is made to feel that there is a sexual atmosphere that's unacceptable, the suspicion would be that he has intolerant attitudes. The military doesn't tolerate people with intolerant attitudes. That man is probably not going to make a complaint, but if he does, he will suffer serious sanctions. In the messy disputes that would ensue, commanders are supposed to sort all this out. You know, we have difficulties right now with sexual misconduct. We have issues with regard to male and female sexual misconduct of various kinds. If we want to increase that threefold, then we have a new policy that says we're going to have disputes or problems between male and female and female. I invite you to read in my testimony a letter from a young woman named Cynthia Yost who served in the Army, the experience she had with an assault. I invite you to think about her suggestion that when photographs were taken of her and her fellow soldiers in the shower, was this the kind of thing that we want to see in the future, especially in the days of the iPhone and the internet? Do we want to have a sexualized atmosphere in our armed forces, all branches, submarines, infantry, all the rest of it? There is not enough time to go into all of the various kinds of things that would ensue, but perhaps I can talk about a couple of things. Number one, you will not get full information about what is happening in the field. We've had an incident just recently, a Navy chaplain who abused midshipmen, 2 other members of the service. He was HIV positive. He abused his authority. And yet, the record of his court-martial doesn't show homosexual conduct. It shows the worst things that he did, but you will not get a feedback of what is happening in the field because even Navy Times agreed we're not getting adequate information from the Department of Defense. You should ask about cases like Lamar Dalton, the soldier who was HIV positive, infected an 18-year-old. You need to think about this issue of HIV positivity. We have troops who are not deployable because of HIV positive status. The legislation to repeal the law says we should invite in everybody who was denied before. What is that going to do to our medical system? How does that encourage trust? How does that help our military to have strong discipline and morale? If we follow the example of the British military, they are now looking at the issue of transgenders in the military. They are very much into this model. They're different in their culture. They accepted a European court order to accept homosexuals in the military. We don't do that in our system. We have responsible people like you who look at these issues. We don't take orders from courts. I'd like to talk to you, if there is time, about many of the unconvincing arguments for repeal that we've heard. We keep hearing about polls. In an article that I wrote for Duke University Journal of Gender Law and Policy, I've analyzed every one of these reports. Every one of them falls apart under closer scrutiny. We don't need to make decisions based on polls. For instance, Zogby. They didn't mention the one question on the Zogby poll that mattered of military people supposedly. Do you agree or disagree with allowing homosexuals to serve openly in the military? Only 26% agreed, but a combination of those who disagreed and were neutral was 69%. Now, you didn't hear about that poll unless you read the article that I wrote about it, but the Military Times polls have consistently been 57 to 59% opposed. The polls are by no means an argument for repealing the law. Discharges. How many discharges are there? The numbers are very small. You have my written testimony. The documentation is there. Pregnancy, weight loss standard violations, the discharges are much greater numbers. Is the Department of Defense not enforcing the law? Well, I would agree. The Department of Defense has been derelict. They have not enforced the law properly. When they suggest there's nothing against gays and lesbians being in the military based on sexual orientation, that is dissembling. The law doesn't even say that phrase, sexual orientation. It is so vague you cannot define it. It is based on conduct. A person who engages in that combat or conduct and says so is someone who is not eligible to be in the military. Do we have shortages in certain categories? Linguists, yes, there are ways to resolve that. The number one way would be to reinstate that question. Why was the Defense Language Institute training people who were not eligible to be in the armed forces? That's where the problem is. The problem is not with the law itself. We've heard speculative claims, all based on guesstimates and suppositions and assumptions. 65,000 homosexuals in the military? Have you looked at that report and seen just how flimsy the research is? Use common sense. We are talking about common sense. If people who disagree are driven out of the military, you're going to lose thousands of people in the military. We can't afford that. Foreign militaries, we know their experience is very different. We know that what they do in their military is nothing like the demands that we have in our armed forces. We have the strongest military in the world. Good order discipline is important. My recommendation would be support the law, keep the law. Recommend that the Department of Defense enforce it properly. We should drop the don't ask, don't tell regulations put in place by Bill Clinton. They are administrative. They can be eliminated at any time. We need to keep priorities straight. This is the most important thing. Equal opportunity is important, but the needs of the military, our military, must come first. It's the only military we have, and we have to make sure that policy is the best that we can have for our brave men and women in the military. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I'm a retired Sergeant Major, U.S. Army. I'm a Ranger first, and I'm a Ranger always. The most common attribute I see on the military evaluation report is selfless service. I chose a career path that placed me in a Ranger battalion. I served in Delta Force and as a detachment sergeant major in a Ranger regiment. Selfless service is what makes a good team great within the U.S. military. You won't find that in the corporate world. Selfless service is what an individual will do for the good of the team. Self-service is doing what is personal self-interest at the expense of the team. Recently, a U.S. Navy SEAL received a Congressional Medal of Honor by throwing himself on a grenade to protect his team. That's selfless service. While deployed to Somalia in 1993, commonly referred to as Black Hawk Down, 2 of my unit members received the Medal of Honor for asking to be inserted into a crash site to protect a pilot, knowing what their fate would be. That is selfless service, and combat effectiveness depends on it. It doesn't happen by accident. It must be taught with concentrated training, no distractions. Selfless service is reinforced with discipline and encouraged by the example of combat leaders. The Ranger way of life trained me for what I do now as the CEO of a company I started 3 years ago, Adventure Training Concepts. The concept is to use the U.S. Army training model to teach the value of teamwork during corporate team building and leadership development training. Our clients are diverse, men and women, adventure seekers of all ages, and I suspect some are homosexuals. All of them enjoy and benefit professionally from the lessons in teamwork taught by our programs. There's a notable difference, however, between the ATC environment and military units such as infantry, special operations forces, and submariners. On my facility, people learn about teamwork and leadership, but they do not share close, intimate living conditions comparable to those in the military. The differences is critically important and disregarded at great risk. In the civilian business world, decisions frequently are based on bonuses and job security. In the military environment, team cohesion, morale, and esprit de corps is a matter of life and death. Bonuses and job security come second to the reality of writing the hard letter home to a loved one or holding the hand of a teammate who is fighting for his or her life. In my 21 years of service in the U.S. Army, I sought and performed in as many leadership positions that I could. As a leader, my first obligation was to the nation. It meant keeping our soldiers ready for any situation for which our country called upon them. It meant taking care of each soldier I had the honor of leading. It meant being fair and impartial to every soldier. It also meant keeping the soldiers under my charge as safe, secure, trained, equipped, and informed as I possibly could. And on their behalf, I would respectfully like to say that in this time of war, I find it surprising that we are here today to talk about this issue of repealing the 1993 law. Our soldiers are overtasked with deploying, fighting, redeploying, refitting, and deploying again. These brave men and women have achieved what many Americans thought impossible. With all the important issues that require attention, it is difficult to understand why a minority faction is demanding that their concerns be given priority over more important issues. As a U.S. Army Ranger, I perform long-range patrols in severe cold weather conditions, teams of 10, with only mission essential items in our back. No comfort items. The only way to keep from freezing at night was to get as close as possible for body heat, which means skin to skin. On several occasions, in the close quarters that a team lives, any attraction to the same-sex teammates, real or perceived, would be known and would be a problem. The presence of openly gay men in these situations would elevate tensions and disrupt unit cohesion and morale. Repealing the 1993 law will not help us win this war on terrorism or any conflict that our military is called upon to fight and win in the future. Too much time is being spent on how we can hinder our great men and women in the military. Let's do what we can do to lift their morale, give them more resolve, and motivate them to continue the absolutely great job they are doing. I hope that this Congress will not make their jobs more difficult and dangerous. They already are by repealing the solid law that continues to support the morale, discipline, and readiness of our troops. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We appreciate all of your testimony today. And I think before we start, we all want to recognize that we are the best military in the world because we have men and women who want to serve their country today and serve very, very ably. All of them do. Perhaps I'll just start with you, Sergeant Major Jones, because you have brought up an important issue that my colleague brought up initially too, Mr. McHugh, and the one of unit cohesion and how important that is. I wonder, as we look at the numbers today, and we're talking about serving in a time of war, that the separation of gays and lesbians from the service seems to be going down. And some would suggest that it's because commanders want to hold on to their skilled men or women in their units, and perhaps there's been a suggestion that they are looking the other way, or they're not as concerned about it. How would you respond to that, and whether do you think that that's what's at issue here? And I'm also going to turn to Sergeant Alva about unit cohesion. Could you talk to us a little bit more about why you see that's a problem? Is that less a problem? Is that why we're seeing the changes today?
No, ma'am. A lot of the problem that you see with in the unit cohesion question regarding turning their backs on problems out there, I believe that's a myth, and I'm talking from experience. I've got 21 years in mostly leadership positions, and some of the hardest places to lead that you can imagine. When you get the troops as busy as they are right now, and in part of my testimony I talked about the deploying, redeploying, refitting, and deploying again, and that's about what they're called to do right now. It's not that they turn back on problems, it's that they have no time to deal with it. A problem person in a company for a commander takes a lot of time because we're very thorough. And when you have 2 weeks to get your troops into the Iraqi theater or the Afghanistan theater, you're going to have to put that on hold. You're going to have to put that on the back burner and deal with it at a later time. Another reason, well, just to talk a little bit more about that cohesion problem.
May I ask you, if you had a very capable person in a position, be it a medic, whoever that might be, serving, and yet you knew and you had a very important mission ahead of you, would you want that person separated from your unit if that person in fact was the very best, but you also knew that it had been recognized that this person was gay? Is there a choice that commanders make occasionally?
My first duty and responsibility to this nation, which is I put up their utmost over everything, is to obey the laws and the orders. And I take an oath to do that when I join the service. And every time I re-enlist, I raise my right hand, and I mean every word of it when I say it. It's a very important time, and I remember every one of those times while I was in the Army that I did that. My officers above me in my country gave me orders that just because I have somebody that I want in my unit, if they're there illegally, then my duty as a sergeant major is to get them out of that unit, because that is my duty.
Could you speak to that, Sergeant Alva? or Captain Dare, whoever would
Unit,
like to speak.
unit
to that.
cohesion is a very essential part of the military, and that's one of the biggest, priorities and goals of each unit, whether it be a squad, a platoon, or a company. And speaking from experience, as the Sergeant Major has stated, that, we all have our different individual experiences, and even in my experience in 2001, while serving on a unit deployment program to Okinawa, Japan, in Camp Schwab, I was in charge of about 15 junior Marines, and one of the examples of unit cohesion that can also be destroyed is the particular conduct of how a service member behaves when they don't want to adhere to orders, regardless of who that person is in title or rank. Maybe it's just the dereliction of duty that one Marine or soldier or airman has, and I particularly had one of those cases where this one particular Marine had to go through 2 non-judicial punishments, consecutive 45 days restriction, and still would break those. And every time he broke it or had another non-judicial punishment, or even when we processed to his administrative court-martial, it was destroying the unit cohesion of my other 14 Marines, because they were having to do other things to make up for his, derelictions of duties, or not, upholding his conduct, what the UCMJ states that each and every service member, should do. That's what destroyed our unit cohesion. Someone who didn't do their job, someone who wasn't abiding by the professionalism and doing the merit that they should when they joined the United States Armed Forces. Nothing else was concerned about what he was doing, as far as on the weekends, or who he was dating while in Japan or anything. It was about the job he was not fulfilling to complete the unit cohesion that existed within our unit.
Thank you, Captain Dare.
I think, frankly, it's much more disruptive to unit cohesion and morale if you have a high, hard-charging performer who's doing a bang-up job for the unit, and the next thing the commanding officers have to fire this person because they figured out that they're gay. I think that causes much more disruption.
Thank you. My time is up. Turn to Mr. McHugh.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and to all of you. As I tried to indicate in the beginning, I deeply appreciate, as we all do, your being here. Difficult issue, and I know sharing your innermost thoughts and passions is not easy, particularly before cameras, unless you're a politician, then you different perspective. But for you, I know it's difficult. And I appreciate particularly the service of 4 of you who have given so much to this nation in the uniform of your country. Regardless of what other labels are placed upon you, you are American heroes, and thank you for all that you did. General Coleman, let me ask you a question, because I got a little confused. What year did you join the service, sir?
1947.
47. So you were 1 year before the segregation of the units pursuant to the order of
Yes, sir.
integration of the unit, the order of the president. True?
Yes, sir.
And you were immediately assigned to a segregated unit.
I'm sorry?
You were immediately assigned to a segregated unit.
Yes, sir. I took basic training in a separate unit and a segregated unit.
And then I believe I heard you say in the Korean conflict you were again assigned to a segregated unit.
Yes, sir.
Help me understand why it was so many years after the order of segregation, desegregation, you were still in segregated units in the Korean conflict.
1951, I completed officer's candidate school at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and was reassigned to a National Guard unit from Alabama, Mississippi, anyway, southern part of the United States. I reported for duty in that organization, and incidentally, some of my classmates were also assigned to the same unit, and they were there.
I should make it clear. I'm not disbelieving you. I'm curious as to what the process was in 48 onward to desegregate previously segregated units. Apparently this took some time because by the Korean War there were still segregated units. Is that accurate?
Okay. I was reassigned to a segregated unit once I'd reported for duty. That was 1951, and that was after President Truman had signed the executive order. And I believe the process was taking place at that time. Some units were integrating, some were not. All the services were not on board to comply with the executive order from the president. However, in Korea, the commanders in Korea, they were smart. And they said, we want qualified people. I happen to be lucky enough to be one of those qualified people that got assigned to a unit in Korea in compliance with the executive order.
So what I believe your experience would teach, and this is really the crux of my question, regardless of you're talking about desegregation or lifting of don't ask, don't tell, do you think there ought to be some program available to accommodate the transition, or do you think it just should happen? Because in your case, it didn't just happen. In fact, I think we could find African American soldiers today who would argue in 2008 it still hasn't happened. Would you agree with that?
No, I think they are all integrated in 2008.
Well, I mean from a practical perspective, not by numbers.
Now, I would say that in response to your question about a program, no, I don't think a program is necessary. See, what I see is a leadership decision, a leadership attitude, a leadership problem. If a unit is integrated, no matter who gets assigned to my unit, they've been assigned to my unit, it's my responsibility to train and equip them and prepare them for combat.
Yeah, I was thinking more along those others who are assigned to units rather than the command. I assume if command is given a command, they follow it. I don't want to be naive about it, but I'm just trying to understand if this order were to be lifted, what the process should and might be to accommodate it. But I appreciate your response. Let me ask, Captain Darragh, I believe I heard you say you were not yet to the realization that you were gay when you joined. If you were, would you have still joined? I know that's a hypothetical question, but to the best of your ability, what do you feel?
If I were 19 or 21 now, today, I would not join.
You would not join?
I would not.
Sergeant Alva, you were of the realization when you joined that you were gay?
Yes. Yes, sir.
And you did join?
Yes, sir.
Help me understand your motivation, what you thought, what your expectations were.
Well, in 1989, after graduating high school and as a 5'1" individual weighing 90 pounds, it turned in more to a challenge when people told me I couldn't join because they didn't see me tall enough or even able enough to join, and I wanted to serve my country as fellow high school seniors who were coming back from boot camp, and I saw the metamorphosis they've gone through from going away as boys and coming back as grown men and disciplined men. I wanted that same challenge. I wanted to serve my country as a patriotic American.
So you were aware of Don't Ask, Don't Tell at the time?
Well, not at the time, sir. Don't Ask, Don't Tell wasn't until 1993. It was 1991 when I joined.
You joined in 91. I apologize. Would you have joined in 91 had it been the policy in 91?
Yes. Yes, sir.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. McHugh. Dr. Snyder?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate you. Sergeant Major Jones, I was reading your biography, and it says, quote, he is married to Michelle Jones, who spent 13 years in the U.S. Army. She was a captain who commanded 2 companies in the Transportation Corps to include 1 year in combat.
That's correct, sir.
After this hearing, you may want to have a discussion with Ms. Donnelly, because she's been leading the charge for the last several years to put more restrictions on women in the military, and we could use your help. And if this issue flares up again, which I don't think it will.
Captain Jones is a friend of mine.
Well,
I support her.
excuse me, Ms. Donnelly, it's my time here. Thank you. I wanted to ask on this issue of unit cohesion. What concerns me when we talk about that, and this is not a novel concept, it's been written about a lot over the last years, but it's a unit cohesion as it's defined by the proponents of the status quo by the lowest common denominator. There are people in the military that think unit cohesion would be enhanced if our military reflected the opportunity and freedom that we believe is America. I'm a veteran myself. I certainly have a lot of friends in the military currently, a lot of veterans. And so this idea that unit cohesion is somehow, if we rock the boat with those who have the greatest fears, that unit cohesion is enhanced if we don't scare them. What about the people that want to see their military reflect the great strengths of America? I mean, I don't get this definition of unit cohesion. I think that's why this policy will fail. I want to spend, incidentally, Ms. Donnelly, you can comment if you like. I think the bringing up of HIV is so inappropriate. By this analysis, you know what we ought to do? We ought to recruit only lesbians for the military because they have the lowest incidence of HIV in the country. I mean, I don't get it. I think I've heard a lot of dumb things in my life, but that's one of them. I wanted to ask, if I might, Captain Darren, I'm going to pick on you a little bit, if I might. One very specific, and this is really facetious. Ms. Donnelly, in her written statement on page 6, refers to, quote, inappropriate, passive/aggressive actions common in the homosexual community. I'm almost tempted to ask you to demonstrate that for me, but I don't think I will. I mean, I've never seen such bias, such discriminatory kind of, it's just bonkers. I want you to spend the rest of my time, Ms. Dara, and talk about, or Captain Dara, and talk about this issue of fear. I think that we tend to go above the issue and we talk about unit cohesion and those kinds of things, and they're all important, readiness. I agree with Sergeant Major Jones in terms of any big changes. We need to be careful about what, how we, implementation is key. But I don't think enough people appreciate the day-to-day life of a gay or lesbian person in the military who wants to serve. Would you talk more about that? What does that mean day-to-day with your coworkers, coming back from weekends, going to parties on the base? I mean, all those kinds of things.
Well, I wanted to qualify my comment to Representative McHugh. I wouldn't join only because I spent 29 and a half years, most of it living under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and I know how incredibly stressful it is. I still love our country, and I'm so proud I had a chance to serve it. It's little things. It's day-to-day going to work and knowing no matter how good your performance is, if somehow somebody outs you, you're fired. That's just, that's the day-to-day stress. For example, if I had
you could slip up.
Absolutely. Or someone else.
You could say,
yes, sir.
I don't know your partner's name. Leslie and I had a great time at the beach or something.
Right. My partner actually is Lynn Kennedy, sitting right behind me, Library of Congress, former employee. But
that
yes.
was me that said Leslie. It was not her. I'm sorry.
She wouldn't even dare to call me at work.
Right.
If there were any kind of an emergency, she'd get a male coworker to call me. And you're right. If I slipped up and said my partner and I went to the movies, I'd be fired. And I know so many people in the military that are still living under this, and I admire them, and that's why I'm here.
Well, in my experience is that people who are out of the military, when they think of that time as you have today, it continues to be something that they well up with tears to talk about. Here they are. We talk about special rights, right, to what serve your country, and the tension and stresses. My time is up. I appreciate your all service, and I'm thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones.
Madam Chairman, thank you very much, and I join my colleagues who, no matter how you feel about this issue, thank you for being here today. And I want to ask, and I'm going to go to you, Ms. Donnelly, because I think you wanted to respond to my colleague, but I do have a question first. What other countries have the military opened the doors to the homosexuals who would like to join the military, and how did that impact in those countries?
There are very few. Britain accepted a European court order. They are now well into progressing to accepting not only homosexuals and bisexuals, but also transgenderism is on the agenda now for the British military. They do have recruiting and retention problems. They have problems and issues with what is called homosexual bullying. This is from the Stonewall group that objects to anybody who objects to the agenda of the Stonewall group. When we hear about training, the question was asked earlier about a transitional program to teach our military to accept homosexuals in the military. Let's talk about that. And Dr. Snyder, it's okay to ask me a question about my own testimony. I'm more than happy to answer your question. What do I mean by passive-aggressive behavior? It means something that is sexualized short of assault. It means the kind of thing like a woman who is stared at, her breasts are stared at. She is made to feel uncomfortable. She feels she has no recourse. She feels she cannot say anything, can't complain about it because that would hurt her career. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Only a year ago in the Minneapolis airport, the nation was appalled to find that there were 39 men over a period of 3 months, and one of them U.S. Senator, who was found to be engaging in what I would call passive-aggressive behavior, something that sexualizes the atmosphere and makes it difficult for everybody else. Brian Jones talked about the kind of impact on introducing erotic factors into that kind of a close combat unit. What that would do, it would be absolutely devastating to morale, because people would have no recourse. They can't leave. In a Minneapolis airport, you come and go. If you go to a facility that involves families, private facilities at a recreation center, there's a sign there that says no little boys are allowed, no little girls are allowed in the other one. Why is that? Because we respect the power of sexuality and the desire for modesty in sexual matters. That's what this issue is all about. It's not about race. It's not about superficial things. It's about something very profound, the power and importance of sexuality. We have to respect the feelings that people have for the sake of unit cohesion, for the sake of trust. We have to not go down the road of saying, well, we're going to try to teach our military to have different attitudes towards sexuality. How does that benefit our military? How does it make it stronger? And if people disagree, they're going to be forced out of the military because we have a new policy called zero tolerance of any dissent. That means denial of promotions.
Could I add something to that? Answering the question about that, because it's something that bothers me. I heard we're trying to find out why we should do this. And one of the things was, well, all the other countries are doing it. Why don't we? Well, let me tell you why. I can answer that question. I went on an Operation Deep Strike in Poland in 1999. It was the first deep strike operation into Poland. On a logistical post there, a transfer post going into Poland, I pulled in there as a sergeant major, and I found a situation that just appalled me. The captain, the United States captain, had put all the females into a Polish infantry barracks. And in that barracks, they were harassed. The females were absolutely traumatized. I had to stop where I was at. I couldn't go forward where I really needed to be. I had to take charge there and fix that situation. It was just absolutely out of control. The reason I say that is to help us to realize that in nearly every country in the world wants an army like ours. The part that's missing is the values training. It's those character traits. And every single soldier that I've talked to, even in Iraq when I was deployed there recently in 2004, talked to me about the need for the discipline type training, the change in their life, to get those things that our leaders teach that hardly any other country does, to prepare our soldiers. And they're proud of that. And if you want retention to go down, take that training away, and make it a wide open army. And anything goes, and see what happens. What's going to happen is retention rates going to absolutely go down. And I'm not talking off of a poll that can be skewed any way you want it to read. I'm talking to you as a sergeant major that has 21 years of service experience in leadership positions, and I stay in tune with the soldiers that I lead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jones. Your time is up. Mr. Murphy?
Thanks, Chairwoman. First, let me just say thank you to the panel for being here in your testimony today. I'll introduce myself. I'm Patrick Murphy. I'm a freshman. I was in the Army, and I was in the 82nd Airborne Division over in Iraq 5 years ago. Airborne, that's right, Sergeant Major. Ms. Donnelly, you testified that gays and lesbians cannot serve openly in the military because, and I quote, it will be detrimental to unit cohesion, end quote. In essence, you're basically asserting that straight men and women in our military aren't professional enough to serve openly with gay troops while successfully completing their military mission. As a former Army officer, I can tell you I think that's an insult to me and to many of the soldiers. To answer your question, Mr. Jones, it was 24 countries that allow military personnel to serve openly without any detrimental impact on unit cohesion. Ms. Donnelly, can you please justify your position that American servicemen and women are less professional and less mission capable than service members of other foreign militaries?
I respect all our men and women in the military. By the way, Dr. Snyder, Captain Michelle Jones is a friend of mine.
Patrick Murphy.
But I think no, I had to answer the other question because it wasn't put to me directly. I respect all the people in the military, and I think your question is not quite the essence of what we're talking about here. If we say that forced cohabitation is the new rule, and we're saying that if you don't like the way you feel, then just relax and enjoy it, or tolerate it. Is that fair? Now,
Well, Ms. Donnelly, that's not actually the question. The question is that you're saying that you do not trust our military professionals to serve openly with other people that might not be heterosexual when 24 other countries do it. It has nothing about forced cohabitation.
Let me finish
In
your
fact,
question.
we have
May I answer
segregated
your
cohabitation. You can, but I don't want you to mischaracterize what my question was, Ms. Donnelly, with all due respect.
You said professional, okay? Professional does not mean automaton. It doesn't mean that people are not human. People are human. People have sexual feelings, and they're not perfect. We know that in the armed forces, with all the wonderful men and women we do have issues involving sexuality. Men and women have issues because they're not perfect.
Right, Ms. Donnelly, and that's why there's the UCMJ and Army regulations and Marine Corps regulations, because if there's hold on now, it's my time too. Okay. Now, if there is misconduct, then there are regulations to deal with that misconduct.
Yes.
But we're talking about orientation, not misconduct here. And that is the premise of my question to you, Ms. Donnelly, is that you're saying that our military, the greatest military in the world, one I was honored to serve with when I first put the uniform on back in 1993, is not as professional as 24 other countries because they can't understand what is right and what is wrong.
What would you say to Cynthia Yost, the woman who on a training exercise was assaulted by a group of lesbians?
I would say to her the same thing I say to every single man or woman that serves in the military. You go to your superior officer and they will get prosecuted under Uniform Code of Military Justice.
Are you telling
That's exactly what I'll tell Ms. Yost.
She
Sergeant
could not
Alva.
even complain because she knew
Sergeant
what she
Alva.
would be accused of.
You lost your leg in Iraq, and thank you for your service to our great country.
As well as you, sir. Thank you.
Can you please comment on my question about unit cohesion? Do you not think that a Marine can answer the call of duty if they're asked to by our nation?
Yes, sir. In fact, there was two fellow Marines on my convoy that day on March 21st. Losing my leg was an unimaginable tragedy that I would never have thought of. But on that convoy that day, and people who were aware of my orientation, no one stopped to prevent my life from going on. They did their job, which each and every man or woman is when we're going into Afghanistan or Iraq, and that's to take care of each other, accomplished a mission, and I was brought home because those Marines did their job. The unit cohesion was not broken. People did what they were supposed to do. They did their jobs.
General Coleman, you're a two-star general. You also got the Purple Heart in your service in Korea. When you joined our military, it was still segregated. It was desegregated, as you mentioned in your testimony. Sir, you testified that you felt like a second-class citizen. And could you expound on that? Do you think that in your role, and again, when you take that oath to support and defend the Constitution, it's not just for your time on active duty, it's for a lifetime of service to our country. Can you comment on unit cohesion and your feelings on what it would do with our military?
Yes, sir. Unit cohesion is a leadership issue, and that starts from the very lowest unit, the lowest level, and it works all the way to the top. And there's a commitment for everyone, and you build teams through cohesion. And if you take one member away from that team, then you're breaking the cohesion, regardless whether it be, regardless what the sex is or what color they might be. You are building a team, and that team live and work together.
Thank you, Mr. Murphy. I'm sorry, Mr. Murphy's time is up. I'm going to go in the numbers in which people came in early. Ms. Shea Porter is next.
Thank you very much. I had the great honor of being a military spouse. In those days, we called them military wives because there weren't that many men around who were spouses. So I thank all of you for your service, and I know that when somebody's in the family, everybody's in, and that means your partner or your spouse or your children or anybody. So I thank all who have served or stood by those who have served. Ms. Donnelly, I have a question, and you may not want to answer, but when did you decide to become a heterosexual?
I don't understand the point of your question except to say this. Sexuality is important.
Well, let me ask you, was that a choice?
Heterosexuals are human.
I'm really not looking for the long talk. I just want to know, do you think that's a choice, or do you think you just are what you are?
I'm not an expert on why.
Well, I have a pretty good sense that you would answer it differently, and I respect that. But the point that I'm making is that this really does not interfere. And from my experience, and by the way, I have a cousin who also is in submarines, and I spoke to him about this, didn't bother him one bit, because it really has to do with how people perform at their job, not who they are or what they are born to be. And so I think 10, 15 years from now, we're going to look at this hearing and we're all going to be embarrassed that we actually sat here and talked about this. And I'm embarrassed right now, because I think what we're looking for are men and women who are willing to serve this country, love this country, step forward to serve this country, especially in times of great duress. So I am going to ask you another question, Ms. Donnelly.
May I comment on what you just said?
Well, actually not yet, but I'll give you a moment. What I'd like to ask you is, are you aware that the Army is now allowing 10% of recruits to come in with moral waivers?
Yes, and I think it's wrong. I think the Department of Defense could do much better than what they're doing. They
Okay,
should
so
be
you're
asking
going
for
to blame
people
it on the
join
Department of
military, starting
Defense.
with the president on down. And
Okay.
that is a problem. But you don't solve it by
Okay.
repealing the law and saying that homosexuals are going to be in the military. That
Well,
would
Ms.
hurt
Donnelly, I'm not
recruits.
really sure why these good people are your target, frankly. Frankly, I do not understand it. So I guess I will just turn to Captain Darrow and say that I listened to what you were talking about when you were saying how you constantly had to hide and how you lived in fear and how you would not recommend it for people to go in. What kind of talent do you think we're losing right now because of this policy that we have?
Oh, tremendous talent. I mean, every day I speak to people that would think about joining the military. And my other fear is there's tremendous talent in the military and people that are living under don't ask, don't tell and enduring the stress that I did. And if these people decide, they don't want to serve anymore, that's another tremendous loss. So I think we lose a tremendous number of people, and there are wonderful people out there that happen to be gay that would love an opportunity to serve our country.
Right, and it's difficult, especially right now where we're having trouble recruiting, and to walk away from people with a genuine love for their country, obviously, is not a policy, and to turn away from people who have done nothing wrong, and to choose others who have committed some offenses and have been arrested for offenses, and to say you are somehow better than others simply because of who people are. I'm embarrassed. I mean, there's not a whole lot more to say except that I apologize that we use the wrong yardstick to measure a person's worth and devotion to the country. And it's my fervent hope that in 15 or 20 years we will change, because I will tell you for myself that I may be straight, but I'm not narrow. And I think that this policy here is very, very narrow. Thank you, and I yield back. I'm sorry, may I take that one question, Chairwoman?
First, thank you for your remarks, and I certainly hope it's not 15 more years, but I wanted to comment again. I mean, I was somewhat offended by the comments about military leadership. I mean, the military, and I as a leader and part of the military, pride ourselves on our ability to be good leaders and to take diverse groups of people, different colors, different genders, different religions, and figure out how to work together to accomplish the mission. And that was one of the most wonderful things in my experience in the military. I'd never met a black person when I joined the military. By the time I left, I didn't care if anything about a person, their religion, their ethnic, their skin color. All I cared about was their performance and their ability to get the job done.
Thank you, and thank you, General Coleman, for being here as well to speak up for people who have not had their same opportunities. We're getting there. Thank you very much.
You still have time?
We have a yellow.
She has about 2 seconds left. Did you want to comment quickly?
Yes, please. As I was sitting here listening to what's going on, I was thinking back to 1948 when I first came into the Army, graduated from OCS, and I said, I'm going to this unit with the same standards that people got assigned to who were able to stay there because they were black. I'm white. They weren't black, they were white. And I was black, and I couldn't stay there. And I looked at some of my gay peers, and I said, they're being treated the same way. And that is definitely not right. And we
Thank
need to be
you.
on equal ground.
Mr. Klein.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks to all the panelists for being here today. Thanks to for your service, your military service, much of it at great sacrifice and very distinguished service. This is, as you can tell by sometimes the heat of the comments and the questions, this is an emotional issue, and so I appreciate your participation here today. I've got to say, just as a matter of sort of personal state pride, that we get a little bit defensive when people talk about the Minneapolis airport. but I can
Sorry.
understand where that might have come from. My colleague, Mr. Murphy, said there were 24 countries who, I understand, I think, Mr. Murphy, who allow gays, homosexuals to serve openly without any detriment to unit cohesion. I'm not sure on what basis you've made that determination that there's no detriment, but I know that Sergeant Major Jones had started to address that issue earlier, and I wonder if you have any more that you'd like to say about that.
Repeat the question, please.
Yes, the question is that there are countries who have opened up their policies and allowed homosexuals to serve openly, and the claim is that that has had no detrimental effect. And you started to say something about a
Right, I wasn't able to finish my answer, but what I would like to say about that, the point I was trying to make is that every country, I've worked alongside a lot of them, Britain, France, England, Poland, the Italians, and what I've seen, the common thread between all of them is they want to be like us. And I can't, for the world of me, understand why we would compare ourselves to them and say, well, you need to be more like them. We lead in every facet in the world here. They wait for us to make the first move. They know our Army's capable. And you talk about cohesion, we have the best cohesive armed forces across the board than anybody in this world. I could give you more specifics on some of those things I've seen. The Italians in Tallil, Iraq in 2004, I was on the ground there, and what they would do is hang out at the PX and wait for Army females to come shopping, and they would invite them to a party where they're allowed to drink, and their drinking is encouraged. And the incidents of rapes just went through the roof, misconduct, and some of the things they did just appalling. So they had to place the Italian compound off limits. Didn't stop anything because they always seem to be one step ahead. They don't have poor discipline. They don't teach the same value system that we have. And what I've seen across the board, like I said, in every aspect of special operations, airborne units that I've worked beside, have always wanted to find out how they could be more like us. A lot of that thing is it's the way we train and mold teams. It's not a matter of like what I've heard earlier of discrimination. It's not that at all. We welcome anybody and everybody, even in the most elite special operation units like Delta Force that I've been in. We welcome those Americans across the board. It's not a matter of that. It's a matter of having a team out in some of the specific things I talked about, the trust factors there, that nobody lied about how they got in the military, that we know we can depend on these people. When we get on the ground in that 10 degrees Fahrenheit in a mountain somewhere, and we can't build a fire, and we've got to huddle together to stay warm and keep from freezing in the night, there can't be any arousal. There can't be that awkward feeling. It's going to hurt the cohesion of the team. And those are the kinds of things that we've got to think about. The other thing is how are you going to implement this? And I've talked about how busy we are. We've got enough on our plate. We're stretched as thin as we can. Okay, now let's stop and retrain the whole armed forces and see how we're going to make the time to implement that safely and securely so that no one gets offended or hurt or court-martialed, whatever the case may be. How in the world are we going to do it?
Thank you very much, Sergeant Major. Madam Chair, I see the lights getting ready to turn red, so I'll yield back.
Thank you. Ms. Songus?
Thank you, Chairwoman Davis, for holding this long overdue hearing, and as well as thank you to our witnesses for participating today. And I currently represent a district that was formerly held by Congressman Marty Meehan, who initiated a discussion around this issue, and I thank you all also to Congresswoman Tauscher for continuing the discussion. As you can see, it is so important. I would like to read something. We had it read into the record, but the DOD statement regarding Don't Ask, Don't Tell, in part, quote, "There is no ban on gay and lesbian service members. A service member's sexual orientation is viewed as a personal matter and is not a bar to continued service unless manifested by homosexual conduct. The law establishes the basis for separation from the armed forces as conduct, not sexual orientation." I would like to ask Captain Dara and Sergeant Alva, is that the military you served in?
Yes, ma'am. That's why I lived basically two lives. My conduct was exemplary. My performance was sufficient to promote me to the rank of captain and make me the deputy commander of the Naval Intelligence Command. But I lived two separate lives.
Thank you, Congresswoman. I agree with Captain Dara. The same is that, in 13 years of service, my orientation was not a factor. It was about me just doing my job. Especially going into Iraq, it was about me as a staff non-commissioned officer, and as along the same lines, and I almost feel like we're along the same paths other than, with Sergeant Major Jones. I was in Somalia in 92, 93 and served the long forces with Canadian and Italian troops. And even 15 years later, I've run into meeting some Canadian troops just out in vacationing in Puerto Vallarta or riding on a plane traveling the country. And we always seem to discuss that because I wear shorts, they see my prosthesis and they ask me, "Did you get injured in the war?" And I say, "Yes, sir." And they're like, "Well, what do you do now?" And I tell them I was going to college, and I actually tell them, that I actually speak, on repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And every single person that I come across from a different country seems to doesn't understand why our nation is so further behind others when we seem to be the forefront of trying to be the example. And it's amazing because it's all about us just being recognized for doing a good job.
And yet this is also a policy in which conduct is very broadly defined. So merely declaring your sexual orientation can lead to a presumption of conduct that is a basis for asking you to leave the service. So how does that compromise, Sergeant Jones, you were talking about the issue of values, a values-based training, in which honesty is a very important factor, and yet honesty is a very much compromised value for someone who happens to be gay and can only stay in the military by remaining secretive or lying.
Comment on that, Brian. The statement from the Department of Defense is not accurate. The law states, and I quote, "The prohibition against homosexual conduct is a long-standing element of military law that continues to be necessary in the unique circumstances of military service." That statement makes no sense. And notice the dissembling phrase, sexual orientation. That phrase is nowhere in the law. The law says that if you say you are homosexual, that means you engage in the conduct that defines what homosexuality is. It's very straightforward. But the confusion, statements like that put out by the Department of Defense, that is the source of the problem that we're hearing about today. Young people should know they can serve their country in many ways. But some people, many people, are not eligible to serve in the military. It is not a right. Sometimes it is an obligation. But there is no right to serve in the military. And by the way, who says that any group is any more perfect than others? Who says that homosexuals are any more perfect than heterosexuals? We know people are human. They have failings. We need policies that encourage discipline rather than indiscipline. If we know that it doesn't make sense to have men and women sharing the same quarters, no privacy, 24/7, if we know that's not sound policy, why would we pretend that it's okay to pretend that homosexuality doesn't matter? This is all about sexuality, respect for common sense, the desire for modesty in sexual matters. The sound policy of the law has been undermined by Don't Ask, Don't Tell. The question, are you homosexual, that used to be in the induction forms, that question ought to be reinstated. Otherwise, it's like, as I said before, when bartenders are said, you have to enforce that law, you can't serve a person underage, and then, well, but you can't ask any proof, you can't have a sign that says, we check ID, and if that young person goes out and has a fatal collision, well, then the bartender is responsible. That is bad policy. On that one point, we all agree.
Thank you, Ms. Boyder.
But the law
Ms.
deserves
Boyder is
support.
next. Ms. Songas' time is up. Thank you.
you.
Ms. Boyder.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman, for calling this hearing. Sergeant Major Jones, just wanted to clarify something. And again, I hope that you understand how much I deeply appreciate your service, everyone's service here today.
Thank you very much.
Keeping our country safe is, I think, our number one, well, it's clearly the number one responsibility of this, of our national and federal government. And when you were giving your opening remarks, I just wanted to ask you to clarify something, because I think someone might have misinterpreted what you said, and I can't imagine. But you talked quite eloquently about selfless service.
Yes, ma'am.
And selfless service. And I know that you were not implying that Staff Sergeant Eric Alva didn't perform selfless service in his line of duty, did you?
No, ma'am, not at all. In fact, I really appreciate his service to our country, and I know he's very sincere, and I'm proud of his service.
Thank you.
As I would be anyone. If you would like me to talk a little bit more what I meant by selfless service, I could clarify.
I would just caution you in this conversation, because I would have been shocked if you had said, no, I don't think it was selfless service. But
right.
I would just caution you as we move forward that we talk about the issue as, as openly and as respectfully as we can, because
right.
many people who would have heard you and known what we were talking about, it wouldn't have been hard to say that you were implying that you have selfless service, that
no,
heterosexual, but that would have been easy to imply.
Would you like me to explain what I mean by that?
Actually, because I only have
Okay.
5 minutes,
All
I'd
right.
like to.
I'd be happy to explain it, though.
If we have more time, and then I'd be happy to do that.
Okay.
And again, when you said that I believe every word, I feel quite certain that Sergeant Alva believed every word as well, too. So I would just caution while we have this discussion. And Mrs. Donnelly, just was curious, when we went back into the 30s and 40s and we were trying to deal with a very, very difficult issue of segregating and desegregation of our military when it came to issues of race, if you could take yourself back then, where would you have stood back in 1940 on that issue of race? Where would you it wouldn't be hard, put yourself back there, and now you're being asked to testify on behalf of this. Where would you have stood on that issue?
Well, I wasn't born then, but I remember in high school
Could you
when
put your mic down a little bit more?
When friends of mine went and were part of the civil rights marches, I was very proud of that movement, what Martin Luther King said and did. The history of the military with regard to civil rights is among our proudest chapters. On the Presidential Commission on which I served that looked at the issue of women in combat, we established that the executive order of Harry Truman was done for two reasons. To advance equal opportunity, yes, but its number one reason was to improve military necessity. We needed those soldiers,
right.
And we're proud of them.
Reclaiming
but
my time,
when you make
Mrs.
it a
Donnelly.
sexual issue, it doesn't fit the
Reclaiming
same
my
tradition.
time, please. Thank you.
Pardon?
Reclaiming my time here.
I'm sorry.
Yes. What would you have, because quite honestly, many of the same arguments were put forth then on unit cohesion, what it would do to undermine this great military that we had, I think we all recognize that the arguments sound very, very, very similar in many, many ways, and it comes back mainly to unit cohesion. It sounds like you feel very passionately that that was a good decision.
Yes.
If you could, again, put yourself back there, what would you have said to those people to help convince them that as well-intentioned as they were just wrong? What would you have said to them?
Because they were just wrong. Prejudice was wrong. But feelings about sexuality are different.
They were, again, they weren't talking about prejudice. They were talking about unit cohesion. And they weren't making a case that black people were good, bad. They were just talking about what it would do to unit cohesion.
Yes.
How would you have said?
What I'm going to say
Do you
is,
think it would have? Do you think their arguments about unit cohesion were valid or not valid?
Prejudice was wrong. We're not talking about racial prejudice. We're talking about feelings of sexuality.
I'm not asking you about that. I'm saying
that sexuality does not matter.
I'll reclaim my time just a moment. If we, again, the whole argument on cohesion, I'd like you to answer the question that I am asking. It sounds like you believed you would have been on the other side of that issue this time. And they were making an argument about unit cohesion, not prejudice. They certainly didn't make this argument on prejudice. What would you have said to somebody who was saying this is going to be a bad thing for unit cohesion? What would you have said to them? Would you have said it's still worth it?
Prejudice is bad for unit cohesion. You do things for the best interests of the military. What we're looking at today is the issue of sexuality. It's personal, it's private. It's something that if we set out as a military to say there will be zero
you
tolerance
didn't,
of anybody,
the light
sorry.
is red,
I'm
I am
willing to
sorry.
go along with
What I
this.
hear you saying then is
That
it
is
did
an
not affect
entirely
unit
different issue.
cohesion, although many
I
people
already
said
answered
that.
your question at least 3 times, but it's a totally different issue right
I'm going to
now.
move on to Ms. Tauscher. Ms. Tauscher, please.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Thank you very much for holding this hearing, and thank all of you who have served and are here today to help us talk about what is a very, very important issue. I am the author of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal, and I'm very proud to be here, not only because this is the first time in 15 years that we've had the ability to talk about this issue, but because this week is also the 60th anniversary of President Truman signing the executive order ordering the racial integration of the armed services. And contrary to what Ms. Donnelly wants you to believe, this is a civil rights issue. I believe that repealing the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy is probably the last civil rights issue we have. We have the finest military in the world. I think we all know that and believe it. And what the military has done for the American people over many generations is form a more perfect union, because over time it has been the perfect union, because it has been a place where we have gotten rid of racial discrimination far before we did it in our own country. And now we have a chance to take away discrimination by sexual orientation. And I think that it is very, very important that we look forward to doing that, because not only do we have issues of readiness that are very clear in our military now, but because I think the American people always want us to strive to do better. And because we know in our hearts that we've had gay and lesbians serving in the military probably from the first unit that it was ever put together. And for now to have a policy where those fine Americans can only serve if they lie about who they are is a discredit to the American people. It's a discredit to their service and their opportunity. It's a discredit to people who have died in service. It's a discredit to their families. And I'm very happy and very proud to stand with my colleagues who are supporting the future repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. General Coleman, Ms. Donnelly oddly refers in her testimony to inappropriate passive-aggressive actions common in the homosexual community. To me, that relies on a rather dubious assumption that the military does not have regulations and procedures needed to address inappropriate actions. I would like to ask you, is the military currently capable of addressing inappropriate actions by service members? And if Don't Ask, Don't Tell were repealed and replaced with a non-discriminatory policy based on sexual orientation, would that prevent commanders such as yourself from addressing inappropriate actions by gay and straight service members?
Well, the military does have a policy that applies to all members, whether they be straight, gay, or otherwise. And it does not prevent commanders from exercising that right. It's an exercise in leadership. As a matter of fact, it's an exercise in leadership to do that. And I'd like to add a couple of other comments. A couple of things I've heard.
General.
The Army, training the Army, a long training program. The Army is in a constant state of change, a constant state of training. That's one of the things that we do in the Army, is to change and to train. If we didn't change, we wouldn't be the Army that we are. And it was very offensive to me to hear the comments regarding the condition of our Army, the people in the Army, how they react. Having been there, that is unfair to the people that are there, that are serving and serving well. And this is not about sexuality. This is about military readiness. It's about giving young people the opportunity that want to serve, the opportunity to serve, and giving them equality. And I hope we would look at that. It's not at all about sexuality.
Thank you, General. I've heard a lot in this testimony today that it has surprised me and shocked me and disappointed me, including lots of loaded words like San Francisco-based attitudes and Sergeant Major, your inference that this is a minority faction that is pushing this. There's a poll just last week, and I know that you discredit polls unless they work for your argument, but the truth is that 75% of the American people believe that Don't Ask, Don't Tell is the wrong policy. Not shockingly, they're ahead of most of the military.
This may surprise you. I disagree with Don't Ask, Don't Tell also.
Well, you disagree with it in a very narrow way, but the truth of the matter is that they understand what this is, that this is a policy that discriminates against good Americans that are qualified to serve in the military for every reason except for their sexual orientation. And they understand how wrong it is. And that poll says 75% of the American people believe that that law should be repealed. That says that they are, not shockingly, ahead of most of the military, like people like you, and they certainly are ahead of the Congress. And I think that it's important that we begin to listen to them. They understand that we need everybody in the country that wants to serve to be able to serve if they meet the qualifications. And Ms. Donnelly, you used the term eligibility in a way that frankly scares me. You use the term eligibility in a way to discriminate, and I don't really think that that's what you hope to do.
Actually, I'm not eligible to be in the military because I don't suit the eligibility standards of the military. There's
Excuse me,
lots
Ms.
of people
Tauscher,
who
I'm
are
sorry,
eligible
your
to be in the
time is up.
military.
We can come back hopefully in another round. Mr. Shays?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you so very much for allowing me to have this opportunity. I have been the chairman of the National Security Subcommittee and the Government Reform Committee, and we've dealt with issues about sexual misconduct in the military, in our academies, and they dealt with heterosexual misconduct. And I am just struck by the fact that some of our witnesses will talk about misconduct as if that is the issue that they pretend to be focused on. But all of us agree in this room that if it's heterosexual misconduct, homosexual misconduct, gay misconduct, it would result in someone losing their command and being forced out of the military. So there's no argument about that. And then when you bring it up, when some of the witnesses have brought up, I just think it's somewhat scurrilous because it really distorts the issue. The issue is, if someone performs perfectly well, but they have a different sexual orientation, should they be allowed to serve in the military? In my home state in Connecticut, on Memorial Day, we read off the names in Greenwich, Connecticut, of everyone who lost their life from the French and Indian War. I suspect some of them happen to have been gay. I don't have a statistic of how many. I suspect when I look at Arlington Cemetery, some happen to be gay. I suspect, and I have a little more proof of this, that the first person injured in the Iraqi war happened to have been gay. God bless everyone who served. I think the don't ask, don't tell policy is unpatriotic. I think it's counterproductive. In fact, I think it is absolutely cruel. So I am going and meeting with an individual who served here, Jim Colby. He shows me that he was a river rat in Vietnam. I said, my God, you risked your life almost every day. And then I thought about myself. I was a conscientious objector and I was in the Peace Corps with my wife. But I was deemed worthy, but he wasn't. And for nothing else, I'm here for Jim Colby. And I have to say to you, Captain, I know that every day you had to be afraid that you would be found out, that you would have lost your command, you would have been forced out of the service in disgrace. And frankly, I don't care what you do with your partner. What I care about is what you did for your service to our country. God bless you. And it's just really an outrage, I think, that you even have to be here to defend your amazing service to our country. Would you please tell me, Ms. Donnelly, why I should give one twit about this woman's sexual orientation when it didn't interfere one bit with her service?
I'm here to talk about policy.
Answer my question, please. You're a witness before us.
I respect the service of Captain Darrow, General Coleman, Sergeant Alva, everybody who serves in the military.
How do you respect their service? You want them out.
I'm standing for sound policy, Congressman. We can't ignore the importance of sexuality.
Can you answer my question? My question was this.
I'm trying to answer your
question.
question.
Let me make sure you know what my question is. My question is, what difference does it make? Let me say it differently. How does the relationship that Captain Dara has with her partner have any impact on the service as long as it is her own personal experience.
Shays, in the military, we don't make policy based on individuals. We have groups of people who serve in conditions of little or no privacy. Forced intimacy is the phrase that's used in the law. That's what it's all about, Congressman. And it's not fair to tell young men and women that their feelings are going to be so disapproved of.
Well, this is what I think is not fair. You answered my question, now you're saying something else.
I'm answering
And no,
your
you
question
know, and I want my
relevant to what
time
we're
back, and I
talking
want to
about
be
here.
clear with you. What you're saying is that she has no right to risk her lives and
This is not
protect
a
fellow
personal thing.
soldiers, sailors, Marines. You're saying she has no right to serve her country because she happens to have a different sexual orientation than you. And I
Congressman-
say, so what?
You're saying that Cynthia Yost, who wrote a letter to this committee, if she is assaulted by a group of lesbians, that she should not
Then the
complain,
lesbian should
that
be
she
let out.
she
The lesbian should be let
so-
out. That's what should happen. They should be out immediately because of their
okay
bad
with you?
conduct.
If it's
Just
okay
like
with
when
you-
I had my hearing and we had people, men who were sexually assaulting women soldiers, they should be let out.
Thank
Their
you.
conduct is what
made my
matters
point.
in the service.
Just made my point. If you want to have 3 times as many incidents of sexual misconduct,
We don't have
and
3
just
times as
increase
much.
the incidents by having men, women,
I don't know any
Mr. Shays,
misconduct
both
of
men
Miss
and
Darrow.
both women.
Do you have any
Mr.
misconduct
Shays,
of
your
Miss Darrow?
time is up. I'm going to move to Mr.
Absolutely not.
Sestak. Ms.
Exactly.
Donnelly, we're going to move to the next.
It's not what we're talking
Next
about
member.
here.
Mr. Sestak.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I don't have any, I couldn't ask it better than you did, sir. And so I just have may I make a few comments? There's this wonderful painting in the Pentagon, right across Secretary of Defense's office. It's a young service member kneeling in church with his young wife beside him, a young child beside them. And under it, that's wonderful saying in the book of Isaiah, where God turns to Isaiah and says, "Whom shall I send? Who will go for us?" And Isaiah replies, "Here am I, send me." It may not be a right, but it's an equal opportunity for all of us to give selfless service to our nation. I joined the military in 1970. I can remember on aircraft carriers, you didn't go below deck if you were an officer unless you had an armed master at arms with you because of the racial tensions at that time. And I can remember 35 or so years later having command of a carrier battle group in the war in Afghanistan and launching a woman the first night off that dove down and saved 4 special forces that had been surprised by the Taliban. We worked our way through those racial and gender issues in those decades I was in the military. I can always remember a young man coming up to me and starting to tell me he was gay. And all I could think about is, please don't tell me. You're just too good. We know by outside surveys all those years I went into combat that we had gays in the military. I never understood how we could come back at home and say you don't have equal rights or equal opportunity. To my mind, it all began with George Washington. Sergeant Major, you know it well, when he gave the very first medal in the U.S. Army. And he says, with this little piece of purple ribbon, it was only to be given to an enlisted man, because he wanted to demonstrate that the way to the top was open to everyone, unlike the Hessians and the British that we were fighting. It was brought home to me when I pulled into a country in the Middle East, and we asked several officers to get underway with us. It was my first command as a young commander. And as these officers left, one of them turned to me and said, "You know, Captain, you treat your enlisted different than we do. You treat them as though they're equal to you." And I said, "Oh, they say yes, sir, no, sir." He says, "No, no, no. You treat them as though they're equal human beings. We have commanders, we have NCOs, we have chief petty officers in the Navy to take care of the disciplinary problems that my colleague from Connecticut put out. We worked our way, as Patrick Murphy knows and others here, through all those issues because we had good leaders. Because ultimately what I found out as we went around the world all those decades is that we aren't born better, but we are different in America. And at those times where our character doesn't show through, potentially at a time like this, we somehow happen to hold up a national mirror to ourselves and say, that's not who we are. We are better than that. equal human beings. That's what George Washington told the first enlisted. They were men at the time, white. And we worked our way through black and gender and now sexual orientation, because we are better than that. Thank you all for your selfless service.
Thank you. We will go on to another round. If that's Mr. Gingrich, would you like to ask a question? I was told you didn't have one right now.
Madam Chair, I don't have a question.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you very much. Then I'll start again, and we'll try and get around. I don't know how far we're going to go because we do have some votes coming up. One of the underlying issues and concerns, and I think it's been pretty well expressed here by everybody. Number one, I think we know that we do put people in difficult positions in the services. We especially do that with the integration of gender. And there are issues that people face, and they face them every day in the services. And we all learn to live with that. The service members learn to live with that. And it's not always easy, but there are rules around it, and we try and enforce them as best we can. Quite honestly, I know that this committee is aware that we don't always do our best in doing that, but we really do have some regulations, and we need to follow them. But I'm also sensing a concern on the part of Ms. Donnelly and certainly Sergeant Major Jones that perhaps there would be more harassment of heterosexuals, if in fact this policy changed, and that it might be difficult to prosecute because people would be uncomfortable coming forward. They perhaps would not feel that they would be heard from properly. And I'm asking you if you believe that, and perhaps Sergeant Alva, whether you're hearing that people are asking for different kinds of structure, different kind of protection to heterosexuals or to homosexuals in order to have a policy that works. Captain Dara,
I would say at the moment, the situation you have for a gay person, if they happen to be being harassed, they can't do anything. If a black person or a female or anyone else in the military, for that matter, is not being treated properly, they go to the chain of command, and then the leadership intervenes. A gay person, unfortunately, is faced with the situation they can either go to the chain of command and complain that for some reason they're not being treated fairly, but if they do that, then they'll have to out themselves and they'll be fired.
yes.
May I comment?
No, I got it. Not to kind inclined here. Is that, as I was thinking that, is that prior to 1993, we didn't have a problem with gays in the military. We created a problem with don't ask, don't tell. People lived together, worked together, and this army performed. Our army, my army. I spent most of my life in the military with my peers, regardless of their sexual orientation. And there were absolutely no problems. And I think we are obligated to improve military readiness by lifting the ban, don't ask, don't tell. If I use myself as an example, if I might, as you can tell, I'm black, I'm straight. But as a 17-year-old, I was probably a day or two from a life of crime. 3 of my peers ended up ODing. The other 4 ended up spending time in and out of jail. The Army saved me. The Army will save others. We just got to give them the opportunity.
Sergeant Major Jones, are you suggesting that perhaps people would be asking for policies that would protect gay men, lesbian women in the military differently than they would the heterosexual community?
I'm going to give you a very honest answer, and I'm going to base it on the experience I've had as leadership, as a leader in the Army many, many times, as many as I could find. And what would happen if you repeal this 1993 law would be a knee-jerk reaction, and we see it in the military all the time, of overkill. And what would happen is that as you see now, it's very hard to ask questions, and that's why you see some of the problems with the assaults. It's not a gang violence thing that we can fix. It's something that people are afraid to ask about, and even in the investigation stages, a leader, it really has to be careful because the leader might be end up being the one in trouble. What would happen if we lift this is you would see that the problem would become a lot worse. It's going to be there's going to be a whole lot of harassment. There's going to be a whole lot of people really not understanding until they're trained.
Yeah, I think one of the questions that's been asked is if you believe that people are not up to that task.
Yes, they are.
The professionalism of the service is not such that people can.
Yes, they are up to the task. The average American soldier can complete any task that's assigned to them, and they will, because they follow the law. And you heard me talk about raising in the right hand, taking the oath, and following the law. Yes, they will do it. Is it the best thing for the military to do that? I don't think so. Is it the best? Is it going to get us more ready for what we're facing right now, which a lot of people in America said that we had failed before we started. The last buildup and going back into Iraq and trying to win this. We were told you're going to fail. We were told you did fail. In fact, we're about to win this.
I appreciate your response. My time is up. Thank you.
Ma'am.
Mr. McHugh.
Well, Madam Chair, I'm not sure I have any more questions. I think after having sat here for some 2 hours, I'm pretty well convinced where everyone on the panel is on this issue. And I certainly respect all of their perspectives. I would say to Captain Dara, because she understandably followed up from my question about would you have joined, I don't think you did, but I hope my question didn't suggest in any way that there was a denigration factor to your service. I was trying to understand how this policy would have affected someone like you who was affected by it ultimately, had they had the opportunity to think about it. And similarly with Staff Sergeant Alva, who didn't know about that policy, but in fact was banned under the existing law at that time, still joined. So I was trying to get a perspective on that. And so no question to the service. And,
I totally understood your question, and it is, as I mentioned in my statement, it's hard for me when I see young, energetic, patriotic gay kids that say, oh, I want to join the military, it would be great. And I find myself telling them no because I know how hard it is to try and protect.
I understand. But as I said, from a policy perspective, I'm trying to understand the net effect of it. And I would say to General Coleman, who not just served during the time of desegregation, but obviously lived with it, my question was intended to try to better recognize what process, if any, was implemented back in '48 under President Truman's directive. And lessons learned is a big issue in the military. Maybe find some lessons learned with respect to what would be required were we to change this policy. But let me say, after, as I mentioned, 2 hours, Madam Chair, for all of the passion, and I might say it was reflected at times on this panel as well, meaning this side of the dais, I think it, if nothing else, underscores what I tried to indicate in my opening comments, how difficult this decision is, how good people who have done amazing things can come to our table and give totally opposite views, and underscores, in my judgment at least, the need to explore in a very substantive way the data and the other opinions that are out there. In the Palm Center study, for example, and the polling data that is often cited as to why this should be accommodated and is at the same time cited as to why it should not. Again, to underscore my opening comments about my disappointment in the military services, because we have to, at some point, I would assume, come to a decision as to whose opinion prevails and what is the greater good here. And with all due deference and respect and appreciation to this panel and this and the 5 individuals who have appeared here, that kind of weighty decision, from my perspective, ought to be based on a much broader foundation of input. And I would trust, as I again mentioned in my opening comments, Madam Chair, that you would afford us the opportunity to conduct those kinds of inquiries. So whatever we do, at the end of the day is the right thing for our men and women in uniform, and of course the right thing to do as the proud Americans that I trust we all are. So again, with a closing word of appreciation to our panelists and a deepest thanks for their service and obviously their sacrifice, I will yield back.
Thank you, Mr. McHugh. Dr. Snyder.
Thank you. Captain Dare, you introduced your partner, and I'm sorry I overtalked. What was her name again?
Lynn Kennedy,
Lynn. And how long have you all been together? You said it in your statement, but I forget.
now 17 and a half years.
Does Ms. Kennedy have any comments she'd like to make about those stresses during what it was like for her?
Based on the last 2 days, she might have liked it better when she was not part of my life.
So, I'll take that as no, she wouldn't. So, thank. Ms. Donnelly, I wanted to ask you. You know, one of the I think the only openly gay man that serves in the Congress here is Chairman Barney Frank, the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, and Barney has been adding a lot to this country, particularly since he's been chairman of Financial Services, given the great issues that we have facing us economically. I thought he'd add a lot here because of his intelligence and humor and his great knowledge of these issues. It may be, after hearing your testimony today, is because he sexualizes the atmosphere. And that was your phrase, sexualizes the atmosphere. So I want to pursue this a little bit, if I might, because as I went through your list of your concerns, forced cohabitation was one of them. Your belief that there would be increased risk of sexual misconduct, physical abuse. You brought up what I thought was ill-advised, but it's in your list, the potential for HIV. Those are all issues that also would affect the civilian side of our government. We have had thousands of DOD civilians serve in Iraq. We have had, I don't know what the total number is, of folks from other agencies, USAID. In fact, my subcommittee, not this subcommittee, has done hearings, and we put out a report on the whole issue of other civilians, Department of Agriculture, Justice, Treasury, all these people serving in Iraq. We've had the issue of embedded reporters. We've had contractors from other places, and I just confirmed, you may have seen my little whispering session with one of my fellows who has served 2 tours there. When they are in those areas, they use the same showers, they serve in the same, they have to find places for them to stay. They are treated in terms of living conditions, they're in the same area. Based on the arguments you're giving today, is it your recommendation that this Congress should consider banning all gays and lesbians from participating in overseas activities on the civilian side also?
No, because the civilian world, people don't live together. They don't cohabit together.
You just missed my point, didn't you, Ms. Donnelly? I just gave you the situation, the scenario overseas. They do live together. They do have apparently they're taking their phones in the shower and taking pictures. Of course they do. Of course they do in Iraq. Okay, that's answered my question.
Do you mind if I comment on it? Because I was a DOD civilian in Iraq in 2004, and I can address
Ms. Donnelly is the one who's made what I think is a pretty egregious argument.
I
have experience on that, sir.
Arguments there.
Experience, I'll defer to him,
I would
I
love
also want to answer your question.
to give you the best answer that you could possibly
All right,
get.
go ahead.
Yes, sir.
Well, my question is it your recommendation, Sergeant Major Jones, that all civilians, U.S. government civilians who are gay or lesbian not be assigned overseas to Iraq or Afghanistan?
I believe they should be able to serve overseas.
That I do too. And the problem that I have then with Ms. Donnelly's arguments is then it is okay forced cohabitation with civilians, the risk of sexual misconduct, the risk of physical abuse.
But that's where I'd like to give you my take on that because, sir, as I stated that I did serve over there in 2004 for Department of Defense as a military action officer, and no, I did not have to shower with other civilians.
No, but
you
missed my point. What I set this up with, they clearly do. I mean, you may not have. I'm not saying every civilian does.
I was all
but
over
when they
Iraq,
go
sir.
overseas, they do. I mean, that's the reality of the
Dr. Snyder,
situation
I
over
would
there. I've
like to
seen it.
comment.
That's why we call it embedded reporters. They use the same facilities. So I agree with you. I'm sure Ambassador Crocker does not shower with all the military guys as a civilian, but a significant numbers do, and that's very clear.
Dr. Snyder,
I wanted to ask.
Congressman Frank, I'm not aware that members of Congress are cohabiting with Congressman Frank. And I don't think I would have brought up his name in this issue
Ms. Donnelly, you have finally found it. After 2 hours, we have found something you and I agree with. You have found something you and I agree with. But thank you, and on that note, I'll end. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Murphy.
Thanks, Mr. Chairwoman. I want to comment about Ms. Tauscher's and Mr. Sestak's earlier remarks. It is this week the 60th anniversary of the executive order of President Truman, and you think that, you know, when we desegregated our Army, when half of our country was still segregated, and really the powerful thing that was when there was a lot of social tensions obviously there when that decision was made. And Ms. Donnelly mentioned it was, you know, it was a civil rights issue and equality issue, but also, as you mentioned, a military necessity, why he made that decision. And, I like to point the fact that since we implemented the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy in our military, there have been 12,000 servicemen and women that have been forced to chapter out of the military. Since 9/11, a combat brigade, 3,500, specifically 58 Arabic speakers, which they could be on the ground right now in Iraq or Afghanistan producing vital intelligence that would help us win the war on terror. When I was in Iraq with the 82nd Airborne Division, my men did not care if you were gay or straight. They just wanted to get the mission done and come home alive. So, it brings us, and I would like to direct this first to Mrs. Donnelly, what would be the greater threat to our national security and military necessity? Leaving a terrorist document untranslated, or having a gay soldier fight alongside a straight one?
In order to have those documents translated, we need to have the Defense Language Institute training people who are eligible to be in the armed forces. And by the way,
we did. There was 58 that actually were trained, and they were thrown out of the military under
stereotype about who's the best linguist. By the way, we need people who are good linguists, but not necessarily should they be gay.
Right.
I mean,
Ms.
that's
Donnelly, come on,
a stereotype.
let's be straight here. Let's be straight, and that's what the American people want. The fact is, when we talk about military necessity, we are in desperate need of more troops in Iraq and especially in Afghanistan. And we have let go 12,000 American men and women soldiers, not for sexual misconduct, but because of their sexual orientation. 58 of those are translators. Now, I will tell you, used to running convoys up and down Ambush Alley, I wish we had more translators. We were in desperate need of Arabic speakers, and we didn't have enough of them.
Right.
And it is a military necessity. Would you not agree that we have more troops right now in Iraq and Afghanistan?
We need to find those linguists, and the State Department's already working on that. And I come from a community with a very large Arab American community. There are lots of things that can be done. But the number of discharges, if you see this attached to my testimony, the smallest column is the discharges for homosexuality, pregnancy, weight standards, other kinds of things, far more. But you could reduce this number to zero or near zero if the Department of Defense dropped Don't Ask, Don't Tell and enforced the law properly. We should not be training people who are not eligible to be in the armed forces.
Well,
It's a very simple principle.
I understand your point that they shouldn't belong in the armed services, and we're going to have a fundamental disagreement on that. But I would like to restate that the fact that there is a military necessity right now to keep our nation safe, and it's a detriment to our national security, the fact that we are discriminating against people from openly serving in our military when there's already rules in place to address sexual misconduct, whether it's homosexual misconduct or heterosexual misconduct, as compared to your orientation. I would like to mention also, when you talk about military necessity, that, and Sergeant Major, I think you would agree right now, we need more soldiers in our military, in our Army, and in our Navy as well. And